My name's Daniel. I'm a senior in college, about to graduate. Luckily, I managed to secure a job offer before summer. So now, I'm taking it easy, working a casual part-time job and living comfortably at my folks' house. That said, my mom's quite strict.
Daniel, aren't you going to do something to prepare for your new job instead of just lying around all day?
I can always hear her nagging in the back of my mind. So, in my own way, I've tried to make the most out of my days. Since my job will be in sales, I've started reading books on sales techniques. I even took a short solo trip abroad to interact with folks from different cultures. I've been annoyed by my strict mom countless times growing up, but lately, I've started to feel a bit grateful. There's this one summer day I always remember when the season comes around. I think it was just as hot the day I met him. That day, I was thinking of heading to the library when I spotted a fancy-looking black car parked in front of an apartment near my house. I took a quick glance and noticed a man in a sleek black suit, despite the heat, with a flashy shirt underneath. He seemed out of place, and he looked like he was watching me.
Gomez.
Hearing that voice, I froze in place. Gomez, that's my name. But I had no clue why any mobster would be looking for me. Maybe there's another Gomez that I don't know about. I pondered, why here? He's probably from the mob. Maybe they plan to demolish this old apartment and use it as a hideout. That'd be kinda sad. And scary. Though no one had lived in that apartment for a long time, it held a special place in my heart. Well, I better get out of here fast. With that thought, I quickened my pace. However, a deep male voice called out,
Excuse me.
Considering it was just me and the possible mobster around, it was pretty clear who was addressing whom. Why me? As much as I wanted to run, I feared being chased. So I had no choice but to turn around and respond. Yes, can I help you? I tried my best not to make eye contact as I replied. The man began.
I'm looking for someone.
To my surprise, he spoke in a rather calm voice. Looking for someone. Maybe he's also some sort of detective. I haven't seen anyone suspicious around here, though. All I could do was listen to him.
I'm looking for the Gomez residence.
I was visibly flustered, not sure how to respond. The mob-looking man seemed to find my reaction suspicious and leaned in closer to get a good look at my face. I hadn't done anything wrong. As I stood there, frozen, he said,
Daniel Gomez.
I nearly had a heart attack hearing my own name, but looking into the eyes behind his sunglasses, I realized they weren't as intimidating as I thought. Feeling slightly more at ease, he removed his sunglasses and said,
It's Marco. Don't suppose you remember me.
Wait, Marco. Hearing that name shocked me even more because that was the very person I had been thinking about just moments earlier. Rewinding back to 15 years ago during summer. At 7 years old, I was a timid and reserved boy. I had some friends, but not many. While I wasn't bullied, I was the type who'd spend recess reading books in the classroom rather than playing in the schoolyard. That's why my impression of Marco, a big, silent boy from another class, was simply that he was intimidating. And I wasn't the only one who thought that. Probably most kids at the time kept their distance from him, thinking he was scary. I figured I'd never really have to deal with him. But one day, on my way home, I was eager to show my mom a family portrait I'd drawn in class. Holding the drawing paper tightly in my hands, I ran towards home. However, I tripped over a small rock, and in the process, I let go of the paper. The wind carried it off, and it began to drift toward a nearby riverbank and into the water. Panicking, I chased after it, but I was too late. The paper landed in the river. Luckily, it didn't sink but floated on the water surface. I began to step into the river to retrieve it when suddenly,
Hey, what are you doing?
a loud voice echoed from the riverbank above. Startled, I looked up to see Marco. I was surprised he was speaking to me, but in a flash, Marco descended the riverbank to stand beside me. After hearing what happened, he remarked,
You're too small. I'll get it.
and ventured into the water. Even for Marco, who was probably a good 8 inches taller than me, the water came up to his knees. I realized it would have been pretty risky for me to go in. He successfully retrieved my drawing and brought it back to me, to which I expressed my gratitude. The drawing was slightly blurred, but not to the point of being unrecognizable. It turned out that Marco and I lived in the same direction, So for the first time, we walked home together. It seemed he was already familiar with quiet, inconspicuous me, which made me a bit happy. Being simple-minded, I felt a newfound warmth towards Marco and wanted to become friends. Though Marco was a man of few words, he never ignored me and would always respond to my questions. "So, what kind of drawing did you make, Marco?" I was referring to the family drawing he had just retrieved for me. Without changing his expression much, Marco silently showed me his artwork. It depicted a man in green clothes with a beard. "Is that your dad?" When I asked, Marco just nodded slightly. I was a bit surprised. In my family drawing, I drew myself, my mom, and my dad. I had always thought that when you're asked to draw your family, you're supposed to include everyone. So, it was shocking that Marco's drawing didn't even have himself in it. Looking back, I realized that this revealed a lot about Marco's home life, though I was too young to grasp it at the time. From that point on, Marco and I became increasingly close. We started walking to and from school together. As the school years progressed, we ended up in the same class, which only deepened our bond. The closer I got to Marco, the more I noticed that he was being avoided by our classmates. It seemed they didn't just see him as big and strong like I initially did. They also seemed to have the impression he was pooey and dirty. Sure enough, it seemed like Marco only had about 2 shirts. That's why there were lint balls and little holes here and there. To be honest, I hadn't really noticed until my mom mentioned it after Marco started visiting our house a few times.
Hey Marco, can I borrow that t-shirt for a sec?
At those words, even Marco looked puzzled. After he took off his t-shirt and my dad lent him one of his, it became clear when my mom brought out the sewing kit. She was meticulously stitching up the holes. By the time it was time for Marco to leave, the t-shirt was sewn so neatly, you'd never know it had holes to begin with.
There you go, looking even more handsome now.
Mom said with a bright smile, patting Marco on the back as he wore the mended t-shirt. Marco seemed really happy, and seeing that made me happy too. I later learned that Marco lived with his dad. His dad, who worked in construction, left early in the morning and came back late at night. Apparently, his dad never cooked, so they mostly ate convenience store meals. What's more, by the time his dad got home, Marco was already asleep. So Marco ate those store-bought meals in the morning, had lunch at school, and often skipped dinner. That had been their routine for a while. After hearing that from Marco, Mom began to prepare dinner every day, including a portion for Marco. Being an only child, I was so happy, feeling like I had gained a sibling, and Marco would often light up, exclaiming,
Is this feast really for me?
However, Mom wasn't always this kind. Eventually, she started to nag Marco just as she did with me.
Daniel, Marco, have you done your homework?
As Marco and I were playing video games in my room as usual, Mom entered and asked, "Not yet, we'll do it later." Replying with our usual reluctance, she responded,
Don't always put things off. If you do what you need to first, you can enjoy your fun time afterwards.
Reluctantly, I pulled out my textbooks from my backpack, but Marco said,
I'll do it when I get home.
continuing to play his game. However, Mom stood firmly in front of the TV and said,
I bet you won't do it if you're alone. It's easier if you two work together. Come on, Marco. Take out your textbook.
Feeling overpowered by Mom's presence, Marco responded,
All right.
and stopped his game to start on his homework. This way, we spent our time as if we were real family. I always believed we would continue living together like this forever. However, during the summer of our 5th grade in elementary school, Marco decided to move away from his busy father to live with his grandfather in a distant place. We thought of Marco as family, but we couldn't oppose a decision made by his actual family. On the first day of summer vacation, as Marco came to say his goodbyes, all I could do was hold back tears and bid him farewell. Mom, tears streaming down her face, embraced Marco and said,
Remember, Marco, you always have a place here. We will always be on your side. I know you'll be all right. Wherever you go, I'm sure you'll live life with strength and kindness. I guarantee it.
Marco was looking down, and perhaps he might have been crying too. In the end, all I could muster was, "You better come back, okay?" I watched Marco's tall figure fade into the distance. He visited during winter and spring breaks, but after that, we lost contact. For 15 years, we had no clue how he was doing. Seeing Marco right before my eyes, I was overwhelmed with disbelief, even more than happiness.
It's good to see you well.
Marco, smiling as he said this, had some fresh scars on his cheeks and beside his eyes. Still, it was the same, unmistakable Marco. Same goes for you, I replied. He then said,
How's your mom doing? I came to your place today to express my gratitude.
Yeah, she's well. She's actually at home right now. Want to come over together? Marco gestured for me to hop into his car, and I nervously settled into his luxurious vehicle before he parked it at a nearby lot. It was my first time in such a car. Inside Marco's car, there was a distinct urban scent that made me realize how much time had truly passed. From there, it was just a few minutes to my house. It had been renovated since, so it looked quite different.
That's why I didn't recognize it,
Marco remarked. As I opened the front door, my mom, realizing someone was there, commented,
That's a bit early for a library visit, isn't it? Did you forget something?
She then looked past me, her eyes widening as she caught sight of Marco standing behind me. Whether she recognized this man as Marco or not, she stood there, frozen in surprise.
It's been a while. It's me, Marco.
Marco introduced himself to my mom, just as he had to me.
Is it really you, Marco? Come on in.
Clearly, Mom had recognized him. Guided by her, we moved to the living room. There, Marco shared with us his story from the day we parted until now. In the town he moved to, there was rampant delinquency among middle schoolers, something unimaginable here. By the time Marco reached middle school, his tall stature and intimidating looks made him a target. Though Marco himself had no desire to become strong for fighting, he was still feared and avoided at school, just as he had been in elementary. The only people who approached him were those with similar intimidating looks who were up to no good. With fond memories of his days with us and a newfound fear of loneliness, Marco began to hang out with these bad influences. By the time he graduated high school, connections from his friends led him to the world of the mob. While Marco admitted he didn't particularly dislike the world he found surprisingly full of warmth and human touch, he felt reluctant to visit us, walking such an outlaw's path.
I was always worried that you'd be disappointed in me. The childhood I spent here is a treasure to me. I was scared that the person I'd become would tarnish those memories, but I was passing by today and just couldn't resist.
Marco's expression, contrary to his tough exterior, looked incredibly anxious, making him seem so vulnerable. The world Marco talked about was so different from my ordinary college life that I didn't know how to respond. Even though we were both 22, it felt like we lived entirely different lives to get to this point.
What are you talking about?
Mom was the one who said that. Marco lifted his gaze to meet hers.
You chose your path, right? If you believe in it, there's no need to feel guilty.
Saying that, she firmly grasped Marco's hand.
Besides, didn't I tell you, no matter what, we'll always be waiting for you. As long as you're Marco, we'll always be family.
Mom spoke with the same gentle voice she used back then. Upon hearing that, Marco lowered his head, but I could see his shoulders shaking, and I think he was crying. Witnessing that, I too felt on the verge of tears. Bearing so many burdens on his own must have been tough. Welcome home, Marco, I said, placing my hand on Marco's shoulder. Even though it was the first time in 15 years that we spent time together like this, it felt heartwarmingly familiar. Fast forward another 5 years. At 27, I recently got engaged to a woman I met at work. She's pregnant, and our child is due in 6 months. As for Marco, soon after we reconnected, he left his previous life behind and began working in construction, just like his father did. He got married when they had their first child, and now they have a lovely 2-year-old daughter and a baby who was born just 2 months ago. We live in the same county, so during holidays like Thanksgiving and New Year's, our families get together and celebrate. In a way, Marco, now a father himself, has become a role model for me. Despite his big, intimidating appearance, he has a soft, doting smile in front of his kids. I wonder if I'll become like that too, I think to myself as I watch him. Mom, blessed with many grandchildren, is overjoyed. I alone could never have brought such happiness to her face. Meeting Marco definitely changed our family. For me, He's like a best friend, a brother, truly an invaluable member of our family. We might not say it out loud, but I hope that we hold a similar special place in Marco's heart. Our family hopes to continue holding hands, sharing small joys together, turning them into profound happiness. That's what I believe.